prominent nonprofit is accused of misappropriating funds.
Investment fraud, embezzlement, unauthorized use of funds.
The CEO of Unison was arrested by Milwaukee County deputies.
Those money flows will sort of speak for themselves.
Records show a massive fraud scheme.
A $240,000 grant from the federal government.
Nonprofit Angels on Wheels. She's now accused of defrauding 2 state agencies and a bank.
At the center of the investigation, a nonprofit.
One of the best ways to get rich is starting your own charity.
Nonprofits unwittingly become part of a story the wealthy elite use to normalize their wealth and avoid public scrutiny for their role in creating economic inequality. We are taught to see the wealthy's charitable giving as proof of their moral character instead of wondering how they came to have so much money in the first place. Philanthropy. Its role in society seems benevolent and above reproach. How could you find issue with people literally giving away their money? What a benevolent and generous thing to do, especially because so many people just hoard their wealth. What if I told you that philanthropy is simply another power grab by the ultra-rich, and that no amount of billionaire-donated money will ever address the underlying societal problems that require people to need charitable assistance in the first place? And what if I told you there's a better solution than allowing billionaires to benefit from the system and then reroute some of the money they stole from their workers in a way that makes them look benevolent and absolves them of any guilt for what they did to get that money? This is the dark world of philanthropy. Roll the intro. You like to assume that YouTubers universally are millionaires, and while it's true that there are quite a few millionaire YouTubers, most of us are just normal people who happen to pay the bills by making videos on the internet. So it may come as a shock to learn that I am, in fact, in so much debt. I have a law degree and an undergrad degree and a house and also more credit card debt than I care to admit to, but I'm working on it, and you, like me, probably wish there was a better solution to pay off your debt. That's where my partner on today's video, PDS Debt, comes in. PDS Debt has customized 0% interest options for anyone struggling with credit cards, personal loans, collections, or medical bills. Interest rates are going up, and the cost of living is too, so now is a great time to take initiative to manage your debt. PDS Debt is giving my viewers a free debt savings analysis just for completing the 30-second online debt assessment at pdsdebt.com/Miller. You'll receive a full breakdown on how to save on interest each month and the quickest way to take care of your debt. Everyone with over $10,000 in debt qualifies, and there is no minimum credit score required. PDS Debt rolls all of your payments into one low 0% interest monthly payment, so you can save thousands in interest and fees. If you're making payments every month on your debt, but your balances just won't seem to go down, this program is for you. So take advantage of PDS Debt's free debt analysis just for my viewers. Go to pdsdebt.com/Miller to complete the quick and easy debt assessment. That's pdsdebt.com/Miller. Thanks, PDS Debt. Philanthropy, nonprofits, charities, foundations, there's a lot of words that get thrown around about organizations that purport to promote the public good. So let's get some definitions straight. Philanthropy is a general term for private initiatives for the public good, as opposed to businesses, which are private initiatives for private good, and government programs, which are public initiatives for public good. So private initiatives for public good is the general definition of philanthropy. Within that group, there are two general categories: private foundations and public charities. According to the IRS, public charities are churches, hospitals, schools, colleges, and universities, as well as organizations that receive funding from many sources or make their own income in furtherance of the organization's exempt purposes or support another public charity. Think like the Red Cross. Private foundations, on the other hand, typically have a single major source of funding, like gifts from one family or one corporation, rather than funding from many sources, and they usually mainly make grants to other charitable organizations and to individuals and do not directly operate their own charitable programs. Think the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But also, trade associations are tax-exempt nonprofit organizations. According to the IRS, trade associations or business leagues must be devoted to improving business conditions, and it must be shown that the conditions of a particular trade or the interests of the community will be advanced through this association, which is really convenient in situations like, for example, in 1984, when a Union Carbide chemical plant exploded in Bhopal, India, killing 25,000 people. The global chemical industry came under intense scrutiny, rightfully so, making it impossible for companies to secure licenses to operate in communities because there was no public confidence in the industry's safety standards. So the Chemical Manufacturers Association, a tax-exempt nonprofit organization, stepped in and adopted a code of conduct, including new standards of disclosure and community engagement for chemical manufacturers. Or in 1989, when the Exxon Valdez oil tanker spilled hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil in Alaska. Or in 2010, when BP's Deepwater Horizon oil rig exploded in the Gulf of Mexico. In those instances, businesses got together in their tax-exempt organizations to self-regulate, instead of the government stepping in to regulate or even maybe create regulations ahead of time so that industries that have proven themselves incapable of being honest or safe, in cases where money is to be made, don't just get free rein to regulate themselves. Okay, this definition section has gotten off track. Just know that the IRS code is the place where these tax-exempt organizations are defined, and there's a lot of ways for individuals and industries to skirt around paying taxes or really having any sort of accountability for their actions in any way that benefits taxpayers, thanks in part to the tax code related to tax-exempt nonprofit organizations. And there's a long and illustrious history in the United States of people doing just that. No one embodies the quintessential American rags to riches to philanthropist pipeline quite like Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie arrived in America from Scotland in 1848. His family was driven from their country due to poverty, and he arrived on the shores of the United States a penniless 12-year-old boy. He started working at a Pittsburgh cotton factory, then got a job at the Pennsylvania Railroad Company, eventually rising to become division superintendent. His connections at the railroad company led him to make shrewd, some would say backdoor, investments in coal, iron, steel, and oil, making him a wealthy man by his early 30s. At the age of 35, he decided to limit his personal wealth and donate his surplus income to benevolent causes, determined to be remembered for his good deeds rather than his wealth. He wrote manifestos in which he declared that excess capital should be administered over the course of one's life to reduce the stratification between the rich and poor, also saying, however, that that administration should be done responsibly and not in a way that encourages, and I quote, the slothful, the drunken, the unworthy. He founded the Carnegie Steel Company, where he continued to amass wealth on the backs of his steelworkers. Those steelworkers were a part of a union, and in 1892, just as their labor contract was set to expire, Carnegie conveniently took his annual vacation to Scotland and left negotiations in the hands of his general manager, Henry Clay Frick, a man notorious for hating labor organizing and using hardball tactics to bust unions. What ensued was the deadliest labor confrontation in U.S. history. Clashes between the striking men and the strikebreakers that Frick brought in led to the death of 7 workers and the injury of hundreds more. Within days, the state militia was called in, and in a week, the steel mill was up and running with non-union labor. By November, with winter approaching, striking steelworkers couldn't hold out any longer. They capitulated, returning to their old jobs with as much as a 60% pay cut. By that point, Carnegie had participated in enough anti-capitalistic monopolization of the steel industry that when he sold Carnegie Steel Company in 1901, he became the richest man in the world. By his death in 1919, Carnegie was a celebrated philanthropist, having given away $650 million and founded over 2,500 libraries over the course of his lifetime. The contradictions in Carnegie's life can be best summed up by a passing quip from one of his steelworkers. After working 12 hours, how can a man go to a library? That contradictory billionaire philanthropic mindset is alive and well today. For example, in April 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic, Jeff Bezos generated dozens of headlines by donating $100 million to Feeding America, creating a cloud of good PR, a convenient look over there moment, while Bezos and upper management fired warehouse workers demanding safe working conditions during the pandemic. During that first year of the pandemic, Bezos' net worth rose by $86 billion. Back in 2017, the Chan-Zuckerberg Initiative, an organization founded by Mark Zuckerberg and his wife, handed out $3 million in grants to aid the housing crisis in the Silicon Valley area. $3 million. That is the equivalent to the price of 1.5 average Menlo Park homes. This grant was trying to stick a band-aid on a problem that Facebook and other Bay Area corporations aided and abetted. They're trying to address the wealth inequality created by these social and economic systems that they exploited to make their wealth in the first place. During the pandemic, Zuckerberg's wealth literally doubled to $118 billion. Not only that, but in 2015, Zuckerberg and Chan wrote a letter to their new baby Max, pledging that over the course of their lives, they would donate 99% of their shares in Facebook to the mission of advancing human potential and promoting equality. But the Chan-Zuckerberg Initiative isn't even a nonprofit charitable foundation. It's a limited liability company, which has really important tax implications, namely that the initiative can do way more than a charity can. It can invest in other companies, make political donations, and essentially do whatever Zuckerberg wants to do with his money. He still very much controls it. It was just a clever way of moving the money from one pocket to another, creating a huge return on public relations for Facebook, all while likely never having to pay taxes on any of it. And let's talk about taxes, because that's where the fuckery of it all really sets in. Most Western governments provide generous tax incentives to encourage charitable giving. This makes sense and seems benevolent until you start doing the math. The median income in America is $44,000 a year. I'll save you some time on the math, but based on US tax brackets, if you're an American that makes $44,000, you pay around $5,000 in taxes per year. That's 11.4% of your income that goes to taxes when you make $44,000 a year. But when you donate to a qualified nonprofit, you do not pay tax on that donation. The government forgoes receiving tax income on that money to encourage you to give. So when you, the $44,000 earning American, donate $100 to charity, you're really only giving $88.60. The US government is giving the other $11.40 in the form of tax breaks. But with a super rich person, they're taxed at a higher rate. So when a billionaire donates $100 to a nonprofit, $74 of that total is coming from Uncle Sam in the form of foregoing that potential tax income. When rich people donate to charities, they do so at the expense of taxpayers. So instead of the percent they should be paying in taxes going to the government to be used in social programs, theoretically, though most will probably go to the military if we're being honest, that money is instead being directed based on however that rich person wants it to be spent. So when a rich person decides to be philanthropic and donate all of their wealth to charity, they get the philanthropist reputation while still wielding complete control over their millions. They still had to accumulate that money to begin with, and in a capitalist system, they accumulated that money by unfairly paying their workers for their labor, because if their workers were fairly compensated, they would be paid the profit they earned. So they steal labor from people for years, and then take that money and do whatever they want with it after. And they get to look like saints in the process. And even after their death, their control over their capital can continue if they have a good estate planning attorney. For example, if you're a billionaire, you can say you're going to donate all your wealth to charity. Then you set up a charitable lead trust, where you invest a chunk of assets from your estate, and the residuals from those assets go towards a charity of your choosing. And then, when you die, the principal is passed on to your beneficiaries. And if your estate planning attorney is really good, they'll have structured it in such a way that your heirs won't have to pay any income or estate taxes on that money. So you get to dodge taxes and pad your reputation with that money in life and control what happens to it even after you die. Not only that, but if you create a foundation in your family's name using your wealth, by law that foundation is only legally required to give away 5% of its assets annually, allowing most of the endowment to be invested in the stock market and growing their assets without ever giving a substantial share to charities. All while paying the people at the top running the foundation a ton of money. According to Glassdoor, the average salary of a foundation director is $160,000, while the average salary of someone lower down the chain, like a marketing coordinator at a foundation, is $50,000 and requires 3 to 5 years of experience, because of course. What's more is that foundations largely are not representative of the communities most impacted by inequality. A 2014 study found that white people comprise 91% of foundation executive directors, 83% of foundation staff, and 68% of program officers. The same study found that only 7% of foundation grant giving went toward nonprofits that explicitly serve people of color. This is because these organizations are set up to reinforce their founders' worldviews, to align their strategies in ways that treat inequality as an issue of individuals rather than of systems. According to Professor Dean Spade, founder of 𝗖𝗢𝗡𝗏 Rivera Law Project, the reality is philanthropy is a system that allows rich people to maintain control of their wealth. Instead of having it be taxed, they can put it into a foundation, which is still a bank account that they get to control what happens to. A recent paper reviewed 3 studies showing that people who earn less money are more likely to donate to a charity that emphasizes social connection and community, whereas wealthier individuals are more likely to give money to charities that mirror their own sense of independence and self-reliance. Wealthy people are more likely to donate when they feel a greater sense of personal control, such as where their individual impact is obvious and tangible. And because wealthy people are the ones with the most capital to donate, that means they're going to be biased in favor of supporting charities that in turn support their own worldview. They're much more likely to give money to charities that advance their own interests and uphold the power they have in society rather than advancing the public good. In theory, philanthropy is supposed to transfer money from the rich to the poor. But in the US, which studies show is the most philanthropic nation on earth, barely 1/5 of the money donated by big givers goes to the poor. The biggest donations in education went to elite universities and schools. Elite philanthropy is often about elite causes, going towards sports teams, cultural pursuits, arts, education, and healthcare. Only a few top philanthropic foundations, such as Ford, Kellogg, and George Soros's Open Society foundations, give grants to groups working to empower the poor and disadvantaged. Most philanthropists see these initiatives as too political, because many big givers come out of the business world and are not interested in backing groups that challenge how capitalism operates, including initiatives to change tax policies that favor the wealthy, or to strengthen oversight of the financial industry, or to change corporate culture to favor greater wealth sharing. Despite the collective actions of over 90,000 foundations for decades of work in the United States, those actions have failed to alter the most basic conditions of poverty in the US, because they're not meant to. Even the most benevolent-seeming foundations, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, miss the mark. They've offered huge benefits for communities. They nearly doubled the amount of money spent on malaria worldwide, and they did the same with polio, helping to vaccinate 2.5 billion children worldwide and cutting cases of polio by 99.9%. But a lot of that money spent on polio and malaria went to communities where polio and malaria weren't the top of the list of desperately needed aid. The foundation did something similar in its education philanthropy in the US, where the fixation on class size diverted public spending away from the actual priorities of the local communities where they were operating. Because that's what happens when billionaires get to call the shots on what happens with their money instead of just paying taxes so that governments can have the funds and self-determination to use the money in the most effective way. Are governments always going to do that? Hell no. But at least in theory, that money would be directed by elected officials who have to answer to their communities and not by billionaires who literally think a gallon of milk costs $40. Not to mention the fact that the richest 1% of Americans are considerably more right-wing than the public as a whole, especially on issues of taxation, economic regulation, and welfare programs. The richest among us want to cut Social Security and healthcare. They're less supportive of a minimum wage, and they favor decreased regulation of big corporations, pharmaceutical companies, and Wall Street. And conservative philanthropists operate at a whole different level, with an agenda to change public debate itself, to make it more accommodating of a neoliberal worldview, opposing the regulation of finance, increased minimum wage, checks on polluting industries, and more. They fund climate change denying academics, support free market think tanks, form alliances with religious groups, and set up enterprise institutes inside universities, allowing them, not the universities, to select the academics who work at some of the country's most elite institutions. Liberal philanthropists have never managed to cultivate ideas that influence public policy debates in the way conservatives have. And even if they could, it would still mean the richest people on the planet, who could only have gotten that wealthy by exploiting the labor of others and benefiting from the systems that create poverty and inequality to begin with, are directing the vast majority of wealth in this country in ways that further their own interests, all while getting applauded for it instead of just fucking paying taxes like the rest of us. But increased income taxes and a move away from tax breaks and loopholes for rich people would require political will from Congress. Congress, where the median member has a net worth of $1 million, 12 times higher than the the average US household. Congress, where its members play the stock market for fun and are easily bought out by the interests of big business. Those are the people who would have to decide to tax themselves higher and get rid of their own tax incentives. Congress, where 32% of representatives and 50% of senators are lawyers. You know what you learn in law school and study in order to pass the bar and become an attorney? How to protect wealth. Period. The bar tests you largely on how equipped you are to help white men remain wealthy. When I took the bar, I had to study family law, or how to protect assets in a divorce, estate planning, or how to protect assets from getting taxed, property law, or how to protect against a lawsuit if someone gets hurt on your property or protect your rights to your property, criminal law, or the bare minimum that cops have to do to not violate the Constitution, contract law, or how to get what's yours if someone breaks a contract, or alternatively, how to successfully break a contract, and securities law, or how businesses secure financing, which literally every law student is like, why the fuck do we have to know this? In my estate planning class, I learned that the tax code is written to protect the rich, and that an estate attorney's job is to find tax loopholes and make sure that your client doesn't pay 1 penny more in taxes than they absolutely have to. And large law firm estate planning groups, where the most prestigious estate planning jobs are, only serve people who are considered ultra high net worth individuals, only people with over $5 million in assets. That's who attorneys are trained to serve. And if you go to law school and decide to serve low-income folks, you are considered either not competent enough to have gotten a big law job, or a saint for lowering yourself to that kind of work. That is the environment from which half of our Senate and a third of our House comes from. It's against their own self-interests and years of professional training to dismantle the system as it currently exists. And the way the current system is set up will only continue to exacerbate these problems. Our businesses and our government are run by wealthy people that approach charitable giving like they approach business, where there's no incompatibility between being generous and seeking to control as much wealth as possible, where the responsibility for public goods and services rests not with our democratic institutions, but with wealthy private individuals. It's a system known as philanthropy-capitalism, which relies on the charity of billionaires to support public projects, instead of just regulating and taxing those billionaires to begin with. According to a recent article in The Guardian, philanthropy serves to legitimize capitalism, as well as to extend it further and further into all domains of social, cultural, and political activity. The piece goes on to say, exploitative labor practices or corporate malpractice are swept under the carpet as companies publicize tax-efficient contributions to good causes. Such contributions may be a relatively small price to pay compared with changing fundamental operational practices. Likewise, giving to charity is a prime opportunity for CEOs to be seen to be doing good without having to sacrifice their commitment to making profit at any social cost. Charitable activity permits CEOs to be philanthropic rather than economically progressive or politically democratic. In the current era, social responsibility, when portrayed as an individual character trait of chief executives, has allowed corporations to be run as irresponsibly as ever. Philanthropy, in the end, has always been tied to power, depending solely on the personal whims of super-rich individuals. As David Callahan, the editor of Inside Philanthropy, puts it, the question should be whether we think it's okay overall for any philanthropist to have so much power to advance their own vision of a better society. My answer is no. I personally do not care what kind of society a billionaire wants to live in. Their grasp on reality is not even tenuous, it's non-existent, as is evidenced by Bezos' cock rocket or Musk's recent challenge to fight Mark Zuckerberg in a cage match and then to have a literal dick measuring contest. As a recent article on Salon.com said, yes, I am citing to Salon.com, don't knock it, it's a good article, too much money is not good for you. It means being surrounded by yes men and having your every bad idea validated. If that sort of thing goes on long enough, a person gets completely detached from reality, as is evidenced by recent behavior from Musk, Zuck, Bezos, and even women like Gwyneth Paltrow. The article goes on to say, with tongue-in-cheek, the good news is that we already know how to save the hyper-wealthy from themselves. Tax them until their nest eggs make them merely rich. And while I agree that taxing the rich is truly the answer to many of these problems, I'm not holding my breath about it. See my earlier arguments about the state of our Congress. But there is another option we can engage with instead. Professor Dean Spade, author of Mutual Aid, Building Solidarity During This Crisis and the Next, defines mutual aid in the following way. Mutual aid describes the work we do in social movements to directly support each other's survival needs based on a shared understanding that the crises we are facing are caused by the system that we're living under and are worsened by those systems. Mutual aid focuses on helping people get what they need right now as we work to get to the root causes of these problems. Mutual aid is not a new concept. Russian aristocrat turned revolutionary Peter Kropotkin wrote in the late 19th century against social Darwinism, tracing mutual aid practices in the animal kingdom, arguing that survival instead depended on solidarity. He traveled through Siberia, countering the idea in social Darwinism that the natural world is brutal, instead finding that competition was virtually non-existent, and that in every nook and cranny of the animal world, one can encounter mutual aid. Huddling together for warmth, feeding one another, guarding their groups from danger. He wrote, "In all the scenes of animal lives which passed before my eyes, I saw mutual aid and mutual support carried on to an extent which made me suspect in it a feature of the greatest importance for the maintenance of life, the preservation of each species, and its further evolution." Mutual aid became a key phrase during the early days of the pandemic, facilitating food distribution. During the uprisings here in Minneapolis following the death of George Floyd and in the face of increasing houselessness in our community, many mutual aid orgs popped up to gather bail funds for activists, distribute food, and assist those seeking shelter. Mutual aid organizations are positioned within their own communities and are often more flexible and nimble. They don't raise funds, they activate their communities and networks when need arises. Traditional philanthropy relies on a hierarchy. Their supporters are above, and the less fortunate are below. They make judgments on who is more or less deserving of support. They set hoops that would-be beneficiaries must jump through. In mutual aid, the focus is not on size or scale, but on relationships, community building, and meeting the immediate needs of each individual person. It also has its basis in trust so that an individual person best knows their own needs, instead of placing trust in a billionaire-funded foundation to make that determination for people and communities. What this leads to is self-determination within communities, strength and protection between neighbors, egalitarianism, direct action, and potentially social transformation. As is evidenced in Professor Dean Spade's definition, mutual aid is not the answer to the problems plaguing our system, problems that create and reinforce inequality. But mutual aid is a powerful force that can help communities support themselves while working collectively towards more equitable solutions. Because of the growth and popularity of mutual aid since the pandemic, there is likely a mutual aid organization in your area. There's so much that you can do to get involved. To start, just Google mutual aid in your area and see if you can follow different orgs and organizers on social media. They usually will put out calls for funds for individuals in your area. Donate directly to those crowdfunding initiatives to help individuals with what they've determined they actually need help with. Show up when those organizations have a need and are seeking support. Donating money is just one way to contribute to mutual aid. You can also share your skills, serve as a translator, volunteer to hand out food, and participate in tons of other hands-on opportunities. Create a neighborhood pod where you live by reaching out to your neighbors and exchanging contact information, becoming the point person to help pool resources and help the needs of your immediate community. Check out your local Facebook Buy Nothing group. Just search Buy Nothing and then your neighborhood in Facebook to see if one exists. There, people can post things they need and things they're getting rid of to help distribute resources where they're needed. You can even start your own mutual aid organization if none currently exists where you live. Representative 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙 everything you need to know. And stay educated. Like and share this video with your friends, and check out the book by Dean Spade, Mutual Aid: Building Solidarity During This Crisis and the Next. And because I think this is so important, I'm giving 2 lucky winners a copy of this book. Enter over on my Instagram, handle is @LeejaMiller. If you liked this video, you'll probably like my last video all about how unions will save America. Thank you to my Patreon supporters, including my newest patrons, and an extra special shout out to my multi-platinum patron Brett Piontek. If you're interested in behind-the-scenes content, access to my research and show notes, content about my dog, and all sorts of other stuff, consider joining me over on Patreon today. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye!